Every time we fought, my boyfriend packed a bag, so I'd beg him to stay. The 12th time, I let him leave forever. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 36 years old when I finally realized that believing someone when they say they're leaving can be the greatest act of self-respect. The text arrived at 2:14 on a Wednesday afternoon while I was presenting our quarterly budget review. Ethan knew I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for that meeting, so when my phone vibrated, I assumed something had gone wrong. Instead, I saw the same threat I'd read so many times before. I'm moving out, again. This time it's permanent. Don't call me. I'll pick up my things when I'm ready. For a moment, the conference room disappeared behind the words on my screen. Then I locked my phone, looked back at the spreadsheet, and replied with a single word. Okay. What Ethan never understood was that this wasn't our first breakup. During our 7 years together, he'd left at least 12 times, always following the same script. A minor disagreement would become proof that I didn't love him enough. He'd accuse me of being cold or emotionally unavailable, grab the overnight bag I'd bought him for our anniversary, and storm out, fully expecting me to chase after him before the day was over. Until then, I always had, and usually stayed with his older sister Rachel or at his mother's house. The routine never changed. He ignored my first calls, answered my later messages with icy one-word replies, and waited for me to show up with a flowers, dinner, or another apology. I always did. I convinced myself I was saving our relationship. His mother said Ethan's childhood made him fear abandonment. Rachel insisted a committed woman fought for the man she loved. So I kept fighting while Ethan kept leaving, knowing I'd be the one chasing him before long. At 3:30, our meeting ended. My director noticed I'd lost focus for a moment, so I blamed a family emergency and left without another explanation. The drive home took less than half an hour. I expected panic to hit somewhere between the traffic lights, but it never came. When I walked into the apartment, Ethan's overnight bag, shoes and travel kit were already gone. He'd packed just enough to make his exit convincing, but not enough to stay away for long. Standing alone in the living room, I finally saw our home for what it had become, a place where leaving was his favorite way to win an argument. I called a locksmith. Emergency rekey, can you come today? Within 2 hours. I'll take it. Then I pulled the flattened moving boxes from the hall closet and began packing. I folded every shirt, jacket and sweater neatly, boxed his electronics and toiletries together, bagged his shoes and labeled everything with his name. Along the way, I found gifts I'd bought him, clothes tied to painful memories and the watch he'd once thrown across the kitchen because it made him feel financially inferior. Those memories didn't slow me down anymore. They reminded me why I was done. The locksmith arrived at 5:43, confirmed my ID, matched the lease, and quietly replaced the locks without asking unnecessary questions. By 6:25, the new deadbolt was installed, and 15 minutes later, every one of Ethan's belongings was stacked neatly in the hallway beside the receipt. For the first time in years, the apartment felt peaceful. I ordered Thai food, settled onto the couch, and watched the action movie Ethan always mocked. My phone never rang. He was waiting for me to break first. At 8:47, I heard a key scrape against the new lock. It turned once, failed, then stopped. A knock followed. Claire! His voice carried the calm confidence of someone expecting the usual apology. The lock isn't working. I opened the door. Ethan stood there holding his overnight bag. The confidence disappeared the moment he noticed the boxes lined up behind me. What is all this? Your things. His eyes swept across the handwritten labels before settling back on me. Why did you pack everything? You said you were moving out. I was angry. You also said it was permanent. You know I didn't mean it. I know exactly what you meant. Without waiting for permission, he pushed past me, dropped to one knee and opened the nearest box. Inside it, his sweaters were folded exactly the way he'd always liked them. Panic replaced his anger the moment he noticed the new lock. You changed it. The lease is in my name. This is my home too. You told me you were leaving. He turned back to me, searching for the version of Claire who would panic instead. It was one argument. No, I said quietly. It was 7 years of the same argument. That morning's fight had started over a birthday card from my mother with a $50 check inside. Ethan called it insulting and demanded I confront her. When I refused, he accused me of choosing my family over him, packed a bag and declared the relationship over. You ended 7 years over a birthday card? I didn't mean it like that. That's the problem. You never do. You say you're leaving because you expect me to stop you. For the first time since we'd met, he had no answer. His eyes filled with tears as he reached for my arm. Claire, please. We can talk. I stepped back. You always come after me. I know. That's how this works. That's how it used to work. He stared at me in disbelief. You're throwing everything away because of one text. You've sent that same message in different words for 7 years. This is simply the first time I believed you. The hallway light reflected off the new deadbolt behind him. For years, every dramatic exit had been a test of how desperately I would fight to keep him. This time, there was no test to pass. I opened the door a little wider. You wanted to leave. I'm letting you. He looked from the stacked boxes to the apartment behind me before his overnight bag slipped from his shoulder. You expect me to move all this tonight? Take what you need. We can arrange the rest later. Hal rubbed his face. Claire, stop treating this like a business transaction. It has to be now. You planned this. No, you sent the text. I accepted your decision. By calling a locksmith? By believing you. His anger faded almost instantly. Where am I supposed to go? You said you were moving out. I was going to Rachel's. Then go to Rachel's. But I was coming back. There it was. For the first time all evening, he admitted what I'd known all along. He had never intended to end the relationship. He'd only expected another apology. I always come back. And I always took you back. He managed a hopeful smile, convinced I was about to give in again. Instead, I said, not anymore. We can try counseling. I suggested counseling after the holiday party and again after you threw my phone across the kitchen. Both times, you refused. I was embarrassed. You always have an explanation, Ethan. You will never take responsibility. His shoulders sagged. So this is really over. It didn't end this afternoon. It ended one goodbye at a time. Tears rolled down his face. Years earlier, they would have sent me running into his arms. Now I finally understood they were part of the same cycle that always brought him back through my front door. He reached for my hand. I folded both hands behind my back. I love you. I believe you love the version of me who always fixed everything. He lowered his eyes, picked up the 2 nearest suitcases and nearly stumbled under the weight. Instinct told me to help him, just as I always had. I stayed where I was. At the elevator, he turned one last time. When you calm down, call me. I am calm. He looked at me for a long second. That's what scares me. The elevator doors closed. That night I slept better than I had in months. The apartment no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. At 7:28 the next morning, loud pounding rattled the front door. I looked through the peephole and found Rachel standing outside in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, her face tight with anger. I opened the door but kept the chain attached. What did you do to my brother? Good morning to you too. He's been crying all night. You threw him out like garbage. He told me he was moving out permanently. He was venting. That's how he processes things. I held her gaze. How many times has he processed things this way? Rachel folded her arms. He had a difficult childhood. So did millions of people. Most of them don't threaten to end their relationships every time someone tells them no. You've always judged him. I spent 7 years defending him. A real woman fights for her relationship. A healthy woman knows when she's the only one fighting. She stepped closer, glaring through the narrow opening. You think you're strong because you changed a lock? No, I think I'm finally tired. Her expression hardened. You'll regret this. Without waiting for an answer, she turned and disappeared toward the elevator. Less than half an hour later, my phone exploded with messages from unfamiliar numbers. Some accused me of being cold and manipulative. Others insisted Ethan had given me the best years of his life. One simply read, "You'll die alone." I blocked every number. At 10:15, while I was reviewing expense reports at work, reception called. There's a woman here asking for you. What's her name? Margaret Cole. I closed my eyes. I'll come down. Margaret was waiting in the lobby, dressed in a pale blue coat with a packet of tissues clutched in her hands. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears loudly enough to draw the attention of everyone nearby. How could you do this to my son? This isn't the place for this. He said you packed his belongings into garbage bags. His shoes were in labeled bags. Everything else was packed in boxes. And you changed the locks. He ended the relationship and said he was moving out. I was emotional. He's 35 years old. Her tears vanished almost instantly. You know he needs reassurance. I gave him 7 years of reassurance. He's sensitive. He uses that sensitivity to punish people whenever they disappoint him. Her face tightened. You've always acted like you're better than our family. I've never believed that. You don't have to say it. Before I could answer, Melissa from HR appeared near the security desk and glanced toward us. I looked back at Margaret. You need to leave. I'm not leaving until you agree to speak with Ethan. That's not happening. He loves you. That doesn't give him the right to control me. She lowered her voice. He can make this very difficult for you. For the first time that morning, she was being honest. Is that a threat? Her eyes flicked toward Melissa just as security began walking over. I'm telling you not to underestimate what a hurt man might do. Security escorted Margaret outside while she continued accusing me of humiliating her family. Melissa led me into a conference room, listened to a brief explanation, and immediately opened an incident report. Document every workplace visit, phone call, and email, she said. If anyone contacts HR for your private information, we'll log it. That evening, more harassment followed. Unknown callers left angry voicemails blaming me for Ethan's situation, but instead of deleting them, I saved every recording. That evening, another unknown number left 3 voicemails. The caller identified himself as Ethan's cousin Travis, accusing me of being a narcissist before warning that the family wouldn't let me ruin Ethan's life without consequences. I saved every recording. The following morning, I received a formal-looking email from Paul Mercer, an attorney and longtime family friend of Ethan's family. He accused me of illegally withholding Ethan's property and threatened police action unless everything was returned immediately. I forwarded it to Rebecca Shaw, my former college roommate, now a civil attorney. 5 minutes later, she called, laughing. This isn't a lawsuit. It's intimidation wrapped in legal language. So I'm not in trouble. Not even close. The lease is in your name, you've preserved his belongings and offered access to collect them. Keep everything documented and don't meet them alone. Rebecca drafted a response confirming that Ethan's property was available by appointment and that all future communication should remain in writing. 4 days later, Ethan arrived with Margaret, Rachel, and Travis. I opened the door with the security chain still attached. Why is he here? I asked, nodding toward Travis. To make sure you don't try anything, Rachel replied. I couldn't help smiling. Try what? I work in accounting. Once they agreed to stay in the entryway, I let them inside. For the next 45 minutes, they quietly carried boxes to 2 waiting cars. Only once did the silence break when Travis deliberately dropped a box labeled glass bathroom, sending bottles shattering across the pavement. He glanced at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. When the last suitcase was loaded, Margaret turned back. No one will ever love you the way Ethan did. I looked past her at Ethan, who couldn't meet my eyes. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. I locked the door behind them, replaced the chain, and thought the worst was finally over. I was wrong. At 11:06 that night, another unknown number texted. You think you're being strong, but you're just cruel. I gave you everything. You owe me. I forwarded the screenshot to Rebecca, blocked the number, and went to bed. 3 days later, the property manager called. We received a complaint that you illegally forced your partner out of the apartment. Did you check the lease? A few seconds of typing followed. Only your name has ever been on it. Utilities, deposit, and parking permit too. I'll close the complaint. After we hung up, one thing became painfully clear. Ethan still refused to accept that he'd walked away. Instead, he was trying to convince everyone else that I'd thrown him out. A week later, someone knocked on my office door and handed me an envelope. It wasn't a police report. It was a civil lawsuit. Rebecca called before I'd even finished reading the first page. Don't panic. I wasn't planning to. You're lying. A little. She laughed softly. It's mostly posturing. The complaint painted Ethan as the victim. He claimed he'd sacrificed his career to support mine, contributed financially to our home, deserved compensation for shared property and ongoing financial support, and accused me of abandoning him after years of emotional manipulation. I barely recognized the woman described in those pages. He wants almost everything, I said. He wants leverage, Rebecca replied. If you're frightened enough, you'll pay to make this disappear. I won't. I know, now we tell the real story. Over the next few days, my apartment turned into an evidence room. Rebecca asked me to gather every message, financial record, and timeline we still had from our 7 years together. At first, I didn't understand why. Then she arranged everything in chronological order. Only then did I see it. There hadn't been one breakup. There had been 12. 12 times Ethan threatened to leave. 12 times he came back. 12 times I apologized just to restore the peace. Rebecca spread the printed messages across my dining table. Read them. The years disappeared, but the conversations never changed. Maybe we're done. A few hours later. Dan, you come get me. I'm leaving. Don't contact me. Less than half an hour later. Are you seriously just letting me go? Every threat was followed by the same expectation. Every one of my replies sounded almost identical. I'm sorry. Can we talk? Please come home. I'll do better. I covered my mouth. I sound desperate. Rebecca shook her head. No, you sounded terrified. Rebecca's words stayed with me for days. I hadn't sounded desperate all those years. I had sounded terrified. The following Monday, my older brother Michael called. His voice was unusually cautious. Has Ethan contacted you? No. Why? He called me first. Michael told me Ethan wanted him to describe me as emotionally unavailable and even asked him to recall family gatherings where I'd seemed distant. Instead, my brother told him the truth. I usually spent those evenings making sure everyone else was comfortable. Before we hung up, he hesitated. He's also talking about contacting your coworkers. He thinks someone will eventually support his version of the story. The moment the call ended, I phoned Rebecca. She wasn't surprised. When people don't have facts, they start looking for witnesses. Eventually, people pay attention to what can actually be verified. 2 days later, Melissa from Human Resources confirmed exactly that. Ethan had contacted the company requesting complaints and disciplinary records involving me, claiming he was documenting a pattern of emotional misconduct. HR refused, documented the request, and assured me any future contact would be handled the same way. Walking back to my office, I realized Ethan still believed someone else would rescue him. If his family couldn't convince me to come back, perhaps my employer, or eventually the court, would. That Friday, Rebecca asked me to stop by her office. Several folders covered the conference table, but she pushed only one toward me. These came from Ethan's own disclosure. The first screenshot showed a message he'd sent Rachel less than an hour after texting me that he was leaving. "She'll call by dinner. She always does." A few minutes later came another. "If she doesn't answer tonight, she'll show up tomorrow. She hates conflict." Then a third. "Worst case, Mom can talk to her." I felt the air leave my lungs. He never expected the relationship to end. Rebecca gave a small nod. I expected the same outcome he'd always gotten. She slid one final screenshot across the table. Just give her time to panic. She always caves. I stared at the message until the words blurred. What hurt wasn't the cruelty. It was the certainty. My reactions had become so predictable that Ethan's family treated them like a schedule. She gathered the papers. These messages don't just show manipulation. They show planning. For the first time, I understood that every apology, every bouquet, and every promise I'd made hadn't repaired our relationship. They had simply taught Ethan that threatening to leave always worked. She closed the folder and met my eyes. "Mediation is scheduled in 3 weeks. What should I expect?" "They'll try to negotiate," Rebecca said. "If that fails, they'll have to explain these messages to a judge." That was the moment I stopped being afraid. If he wanted strangers to hear our story, they finally would. 3 weeks later, we faced each other across a conference table in a downtown mediation office. The room was calm and carefully designed to encourage compromise, but nothing about it felt capable of holding 7 years of resentment. Rebecca set 2 thick binders in front of us. "Don't argue, stay calm." The timeline speaks for itself. Across the table, Ethan sat beside his attorney, while his mother paced outside the glass-walled conference room, barred from participating. At exactly 9 o'clock, the mediator, Karen Willis, opened the session. "My job isn't to decide who's right," she said. "It's to determine whether this dispute can be resolved without litigation." Ethan's attorney began by portraying him as a devoted partner who had sacrificed his career to support mine before being unfairly forced out of our shared home. Rebecca waited until he finished, then calmly slid the first binder toward Karen. "Before discussing money, we'd like to establish the history of the relationship." Page after page revealed the same cycle repeated over 7 years. "I'm leaving. Don't contact me." Hours later. "Why aren't you calling?" Then, "Can you come get me?" Karen slowly closed the file. "How many documented incidents?" 12, Rebecca answered. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I was emotional. "No one is disputing that," Rebecca replied. "The question is whether those emotional episodes became a repeated method of controlling the relationship." After reviewing several more exchanges, Karen looked up. "The pattern is remarkably consistent." "You're making me sound manipulative," Ethan muttered. Rebecca didn't even look at him. "We don't need to characterize his behavior. His own messages already do that." His attorney quickly changed direction, arguing that Ethan had sacrificed professional opportunities for our relationship. Rebecca then walked Karen through employment records, bank statements, and household expenses, all of which showed that Ethan had voluntarily left multiple jobs while I had continued paying most of our living costs, including services he later claimed to have provided himself. The discussion then moved to disputed property. Whenever Ethan claimed ownership, Rebecca matched the claim against purchase records. Items supported by shared ownership remained under negotiation. Unsupported claims were quietly set aside. Karen leaned back slightly before speaking. "So you're willing to compromise?" "Of course," Rebecca replied. "We're only challenging claims that can't be substantiated." By noon, mediation paused for lunch. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, Margaret walked straight toward me. "You're enjoying this?" "No. You're destroying my son. He destroyed our relationship long before today. You could have settled this quietly." "I tried," I said. "The day he texted me that he was leaving, Margaret shook her head. You never understood him. I met her gaze without raising my voice. No, I understood him better than anyone. Before she could answer, Karen stepped out of the conference room. Mrs. Cole, please give the parties some space. Margaret reluctantly returned to the waiting area. The afternoon session focused on finances. After reviewing the documents, Karen concluded that Ethan's request for long-term financial support was difficult to justify. His attorney argued that Ethan needed time to rebuild his life. Her tune never changed. Needing time doesn't create a legal right to someone else's income. Karen agreed that only a limited portion of assets acquired during the relationship could reasonably be considered. Rebecca had already prepared those calculations, and the numbers were nowhere near Ethan's original demands. The remaining recommendations followed the same pattern. Documented ownership would determine disputed property. I would retain the apartment because Ethan had never been on the lease, and any financial settlement would be limited to jointly acquired assets rather than ongoing support. As Karen finished, silence settled over the room. Ethan stared at the recommendation sheet before finally looking at me. I never thought you'd fight me like this. The words almost made me smile. For years, I'd been the only one fighting, trying to calm him, repair every argument and save a relationship he kept threatening to end. I wasn't fighting anymore. I just stopped chasing someone who kept walking away. His eyes reddened. You've changed. She quietly closed the binder. No, she finally stopped changing herself. Karen gathered the paperwork. These recommendations aren't binding, but based on the evidence, they're consistent with the outcome a court would likely reach. Ethan's attorney requested a short recess. Through the glass wall, I watched Margaret speaking rapidly, while Ethan stood with his head lowered, barely responding. When they returned a few minutes later, his attorney's confidence had noticeably faded. We're prepared to continue negotiating. For the next hour, the discussion became far more practical. One by one, unsupported claims disappeared, inflated demands were reduced, and the remaining issues were resolved through documented evidence rather than emotion. By 4 o'clock, nearly every major dispute had been settled. As everyone stood to leave, Ethan stayed in his chair a moment longer. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like someone realizing that the tactics which had controlled our relationship for 7 years carried no weight once every claim had to be supported by facts. Outside the conference room, Margaret was waiting. The moment she saw us, she hurried forward. You've ruined his future! Margaret's voice echoed through the hallway, drawing the attention of nearby office employees. He gave you everything! Rebecca calmly stepped between us. My client has nothing further to discuss. Margaret pointed at me. You'll regret this. I met her eyes. I only regret staying as long as I did. Before she could continue, security escorted her toward the elevators. Her voice faded as the doors closed behind her. Rebecca looked at me. How are you holding up? I glanced at the empty hallway. I no longer felt like I was the one on trial. I thought mediation would end the conflict. Instead, it changed its form. 3 days later, Rebecca called while I was driving home. They've accepted most of the recommendations. That was fast. It usually means one last emotional push is coming. She was right. That evening, Ethan called from an unknown number. I never wanted this to go so far. You filed the lawsuit. My mom pushed me. You still signed it. After a long silence, he admitted what I'd suspected all along. I thought you'd stop me. I closed my eyes. You're still acting like it was my responsibility to save you from your own decisions. I didn't think you'd actually let me go. I know, I said quietly. It hurt me every other time you left. I ended the call and immediately forwarded the call log to Rebecca, who told me not to answer any future attempts. A week later, a handwritten letter arrived. Ethan claimed he'd planned to propose, blamed everything on one mistake and begged me not to throw away 7 years together. I read it once, filed it with the rest of the evidence and sent Rebecca a scanned copy. You finally see these for what they are, she said. A reminder. 2 nights later, Ethan appeared at my favorite coffee shop. He sat at the next table without speaking, watching me in silence for nearly 15 minutes as if waiting for me to begin the conversation for him. Instead, I packed my laptop and left. I miss you, he called after me. I kept walking. Outside, I noted the time, location and witnesses before emailing Rebecca. A formal warning was sent that same day. 3 days later, Margaret tried again. Her letter pleaded for forgiveness, describing Ethan's sleepless nights, weight loss and promises that he'd changed. She urged me to try counseling and save our future together. I finished reading, dropped the letter into the recycling bin and started making dinner. When I told Rebecca what I'd done, she laughed. You know what's interesting? What? They've stopped talking about money. She was right. The lawsuit had begun with financial demands. Now every message was about getting me back. They don't want the case anymore, I said. Rebecca shook her head. They don't want the money. They want the control. That sentence stayed with me. For years, I'd mistaken Ethan's behavior for insecurity, then for fear, then for something love could fix. The pattern survived because I never stopped answering it. The following morning, the court issued a communication order requiring every discussion about the case to go through legal counsel. No more personal calls. No surprise visits. No more attempts to negotiate through emotion. For the first time since Ethan's breakup text interrupted my presentation, the boundary protecting me no longer depended on my own resolve. The court had made it official. A month later, the final settlement was signed. Ethan received a modest payment for the household items we had jointly purchased, but none of the savings, retirement funds, or long-term financial support he had originally demanded. As we finished signing the paperwork, his eyes settled on me. "So this is really over?" I met his eyes without hesitation. "It ended the day you told me it was permanent." He lowered his head. "I never thought you'd believe me." I finally learned I should. Neither of us spoke again. When I walked out carrying a single folder, I realized 7 years of memories had been reduced to a few legal documents. Strangely, they felt lighter than everything I'd carried while trying to save the relationship. The settlement became final on a rainy Tuesday morning. Rebecca called shortly after 10. "It's done. The court approved everything." After we hung up, I expected relief. Instead, I sat quietly at my desk, realizing how much of my life had revolved around anticipating Ethan's next reaction. Even when he wasn't with me, I was constantly deciding what to say, whether to apologize or how quickly I needed to fix the latest crisis. Now there was nothing left to fix. The case was over, the communication restrictions remained in place, and every threat Ethan had once treated as temporary had become permanent. That evening, I drove home through light rain. The apartment looked exactly the same from the outside, but when I unlocked the door, the silence felt different. It no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. While putting away a few things, I noticed the box holding our old photographs and keepsakes. One picture showed us smiling beside a lake, looking like the couple everyone assumed would last forever. Then I remembered what happened only minutes after it was taken. Ethan had accused me of ignoring him because I'd spent too long talking to another couple, and we argued the entire drive home. The photograph had preserved the smile. My memory had preserved the truth. I returned it to the box and closed the lid. About a month after the settlement, I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Morgan Lee. During our first session, she asked why I'd stayed for 7 years. "I loved him," I said. "I believe that," she replied gently. But love wasn't the only reason. Over the following weeks, she helped me understand the difference between supporting someone and managing them, between forgiveness and enabling behavior. She never called me weak. Instead, she explained that I'd learned to believe peace depended on keeping Ethan happy. Whenever he left, bringing him back felt like solving the problem. But the problem never disappeared, she said. It always came back. I finally understood that every time I tried to save the relationship, I was really preserving the behavior that kept destroying it. Dr. Lee put it simply. You kept repairing the ending instead of changing your response. That idea stayed with me long after our sessions ended. I began noticing how often I apologized when I hadn't done anything wrong. At work, with friends, even when strangers bumped into me, sorry, had become an automatic response. Breaking that habit took time, but the people around me made it easier. They supported me without asking me to justify why I'd stayed or explain why I'd finally left. Not everyone saw the story the same way. At first, Ethan told mutual friends I'd abandoned him over one emotional mistake. As the legal filings and text messages surfaced, that version became harder to believe. I heard occasional updates through people who still knew both of us. Ethan moved back in with Margaret, struggled to keep stable work, and continued describing himself as the victim of a financially abusive relationship. Margaret repeated the same story to anyone willing to listen. I stopped trying to correct either of them. People determined to misunderstand me would always find a reason. 2 months after the settlement, another letter arrived from Margaret asking me to forgive Ethan and try counseling because he'd changed. I filed it with the others and never responded. The communication order didn't stop Ethan completely. He violated it twice. Once with a late-night message claiming we'd almost been engaged, and once by silently sitting beside me at my favorite coffee shop, apparently hoping I'd start the conversation. Instead, I documented both incidents, notified Rebecca, and let my attorney handle them. After that, he disappeared from my life. The months that followed were remarkably ordinary. The apartment slowly became my own as I rearranged the furniture, replaced a few things, and made quiet decisions without wondering how Ethan would react. They weren't dramatic changes. They were simply mine. The last time I saw Rachel was in a grocery store. She recognized me immediately, hesitated as if she wanted to say something, then quietly turned and walked away. I finished my shopping without looking back. One rainy evening, I carried the box holding our old photographs and the locksmith receipt into the storage closet. placed it on the highest shelf and quietly closed the door. When I locked the front door that night, the new deadbolt clicked into place. For 7 years, that sound would have meant Ethan had walked out again. Now it meant I was finally home.